Today, I want to explain Israel to Christians. Can we do that today? All right. Well, we got to go back to the Bible first of all and explain a prophecy. The Bible says that when the Jews come back to their homeland, this is one of the major prophecies that signal the prophetic end time. But there are very specific details, like they would use their language, which had disappeared, so they speak Hebrew today. But there's another thing that Hosea prophesied, that Israel would have no king, and Israel currently has no king. Israel has no president. So Israel has a different kind of system that we need to understand. And what is this failure of Benjamin Netanyahu to form government? What does that mean? What does the next snap election mean? Let's take a look at Hosea chapter 3, verse 4. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, without ephod or teraphim. So they're going to be there again, but not in the same way that they were used to it back in the ancient biblical times. There's no king, there are no princes, there's no Davidic dynasty, there's no temple sacrifice because there's no temple at all. So Hosea chapter 3 is extremely accurate about this. And modern Israel's government has no president. It's made of the Knesset, which has 120 members. And whoever gets the majority of votes gets to form government and pick the prime minister. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu failed to form government. That means that he failed to get 61 members to join his coalition. It was an even 60-60 split between supporters of Netanyahu and opponents of Netanyahu. Now, how does this work? Israel has actually, if you see that graph, Israel has more than what's displayed there, has about 43 political parties. And in each election, about 11 to 12 get into the Knesset. Israel has a particular requirement. It's a threshold. It's called electoral threshold. Each party needs to get 3.25% of all the votes for that party to win any seat. So that translates right now to a candidate needing about 35,000 votes to win a seat in the Knesset. However, his or her party needs 140,000 votes to get over the threshold. So if the party meets the threshold, they pass that threshold, they instantly get around 4 members into the Knesset. If they don't pass the threshold, then in effect, all those votes that went to them up to, say, 139,999, all those votes go down the drain. They're a loss. So in fact, what happened in this election on April the 9th is that 2 of the conservative parties that would have supported Benjamin Netanyahu lost the election. They failed to meet or pass that threshold. So now a re-election is needed. So they've called for an election on the 17th of September, and I'll explain at the end the significance of that number and that event. But possibly it could allow a different kind of government to be formed. And maybe the 2 conservative parties that failed to meet the threshold, they might combine, and we will see. Then they will certainly support Netanyahu. What I'd like to tell Christians today are 7 things that I believe many Christians don't know about Israel. I take tours to Israel. I lead tours, biblical tours to Israel, and I'm always fascinated about these things. And I think a lot of people just don't know. If you haven't been there, haven't talked to the people there, you might not know. First of all, the first fact that's pretty important is that Israel has 2% Christians. Ethnically, Israel's 75% Jews, divided between the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews. The Sephardic means they're from the Middle East, they're from North Africa. The Ashkenazi are mainly the European Jews. All right, they're pretty much half and half, a bit more on the Sephardic side. So that's 75% of the Israelis. 20% are Arab, about 4% are minorities. And out of all of those people, no matter what ethnicity, Christians represent about 2% of the Israeli population. And Christians and spouses combined, because many of the Jews married Christian spouses, that's even more. I heard Avi Lipkin, who leads the Bible Block Party, say that he estimates around 400,000 Russian-speaking Christians and Jews married to Christians, and around 100,000 Arabic-speaking Christians. That's a total of 500,000 people, which should have given the Christians 8 to 9 seats in the Knesset. And guess what? Christians have zero, a big fat zero representation in the Knesset. There's no party that represents Jews or Jews and Christians at all in Israel, except possibly Avi Lipkin's Bible Bloc Party. So when Christians have zero representation, that means, you think of the days when America had a revolution and cried out, no taxation without representation. Well, I think that if you're a Jew that's married to a Christian, or you're a Christian, quite possibly in the next election, you might want to be looking at the Bible Bloc Party and see, hey, can we finally get some representation in the Knesset? That's pretty important. Number 2 fact, and this is quite a complicating factor for us who live in the West, the politically conservative in Israel actually means the anti-Christian or anti-Messianic wing. So to be pro-Christian in Israel is actually considered left-wing. And that's very strange to us, because left wing would mean the pro-Christian, any pro-Christian politician or party would be grouped with the secularists, the pro-abortionists, the pro-homosexuals, and even the Islamic parties. It's amazing, but things are just not the same over there in Israel. Number 3, the vast majority of modern Israel is secularist. They're not religious. So you have around 15 to 22% Ultra-Orthodox. That's the extreme right wing in Israel. They're called the Haredi. 29% are conservative. They're Masoreti, and also Reform. So conservative, they believe God, they believe the Bible, but they believe things that are like men and women can sit together. That would be conservative. And then the Reform would be the equivalent of the very, very liberal churches today. The Reform would be more of the left wing of the religious groups in Israel. All right, so 15 to 22% Orthodox, 29% conservative and Reform. But 49% of Israelis consider themselves secular or Hiloni. And that means that they're usually leftists. They don't want the ultra-Orthodox. And that is the main reason why the government could not form. Benjamin Netanyahu could not form government in this election, because a lot of people do not want the ultra-Orthodox to enforce their religious halakha, their religious laws. So, 4th, I know this is a lot of things Christians might not know. 4th, which way is Israel going? Is it going more left, which is secularist, godless, but also includes the Christians, or is it going more right, which is the ultra-Orthodox? I say this, I know it sounds controversial, but I say today, the modern Jewish state is not very Jewish. And what I mean by that is, it's not biblically Jewish. It's very secular and very leftist. However, the Jewish state is projected to become more and more right-wing because the ultra-Orthodox are having many more babies. And they are what we would consider, when we read our New Testament, they would be the descendants of the Pharisees. They want absolute, total control of society. And they want to apply halakha, which is the Jewish, Talmudic, rabbinic application of the law, to every person in Israel. The ultra-Orthodox are also called the Haredim. They want a halakhic state. That's like a Torah, Talmud-driven state. They want to enforce a mix of Torah and Talmud, which is their rabbinic commentaries and traditions. So this is a commentary I received from someone local, a missionary who's been there for, I think, nearly 50 years. And her name is Shira, and she said this: the Israelis dislike ultra-Orthodox because they have a hateful and often violent behavior, and they want to force their way of life on the rest of the Israelis. The Haredim parties, which is ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim parties in government take a hugely disproportionate amount of tax money for their lifestyles. Most of the men refuse to work, and they do not want to serve in the army. So what do they want to do? They want to sit and study Torah, but even more than that, they want to study the Talmud, the rabbinical commentaries on the Torah, and that's what they do all day. Now, when the Haredim are in government, they distribute large amounts of money among their own, which is, again, so strange to us in the Western world. They are called the ultra-right-wing party, and yet they're very much pro-welfare state, but welfare for themselves, the Haredim. As a result, the Haredim grow larger families when they're in government than when they're not, because of the extra money. Secondly, even as their numbers are growing, they refuse to serve in the army. This puts a larger and larger burden on the rest of the Jewish population who have to serve in the army. The stats that I read state that at the present, percentage of large growth among the ultra-Orthodox in 30 or so years, that's not far, you're talking about 2050, the state will implode for lack of sufficient army and the increase of tax burden on the decreasing percentage of secular Jews. So you can compare back when Israel was first formed, the ultra-Orthodox were there, compromises were made, even though a secular government was formed, compromises were made, and 500 military exemptions were given to the yeshiva Jews. These are Jews who just want to be in the yeshiva and study. Today, there are 125,000 exemptions for yeshiva Jews. So they don't have to go to the military. And that was part of the problem during this election. They just thought, the secularists, Jews thought that's not fair. But the demographics show that the Orthodox will eventually become a majority because they have more children. So we're in a very strange, precarious situation. Right doesn't mean right, left doesn't mean left. Things are not as they appear, and very complicated in Israel. And one of the surprising conclusions, this is fact number 5 for the Christian to understand Israel, is the only thing really keeping the Jews together politically are the Muslims acting as a common enemy. So without the Muslims, really the Jewish state would descend into civil war. And this is the precarious moment in Israel right now. You know, Israel always had 13 tribes, but they had the Torah to unite them. They had prophets and priests, and all this was set up to unite them. Today, they don't have any of that. And so there's a lot of disunity, quite like, not so dissimilar to what's going on in America. It's very amazing how Israel and America are connected at a spiritual level and even at political level. Things are just seem to be going in tandem. Number 6, I want to say that people don't recognize the importance of Christianity to the Jews. Without Christians, really the Jews wouldn't have a friend in the world. Avi Lipkin, who's there and who's trying to form this Bible block party, he said the only reason, now he's a Jew, he's not Messianic, he doesn't believe in Jesus, but he said, quote, the only reason the Holocaust happened was because there weren't enough Christians to protect the Jews. Who protected the Jews during World War II? Christians. Christians, names like Corrie ten Boom, risked their lives to protect the children of God, the chosen children of God, according to the Bible. But Jews don't really believe that. Through 2,000 years of brainwashing, they somehow believe that Christ is the enemy, their own Jewish. The most famous Jew is their enemy in their mind, and that Christians are their enemy. And this is just a total lie and deception. Christians are, in fact, the only friends that Jews have left in this world. And if we see the development of a right-wing religious state in Israel, you know, this halakhic state, it would mean really disaster for the Christians. It may actually, you know, play into or lead into the end-time scenario where so many Christians and Messianics get persecuted. But that's not yet. And this is what this election is telling us, is the voices on the secular side are still stronger, and they're still the majority in Israel. But when one day the ultra-Orthodox, if they were to get in power, they actually hate Christians to the point that one of their policies is they want Christians who migrated to Israel to be deported. And they want Jews who married Christians to be deported. So there's a law that allows Jews to migrate to Israel, but there's no law preventing them from expelling those Jews. So it's kind of a legal loophole. And you always see that. Evil always wants to do things legally. They don't want to just commit crimes illegally or immorality illegally. They like to go through law. So the Orthodox hates the Christians. The Orthodox also the Ultra-Orthodox hate the Messianics. Those are the Jews who have actually found out through their own Torah study that Yeshua is the Messiah. Yeshua fulfilled the promises in Genesis. He'll bruise the head of the serpent. He'll be born in Bethlehem. He'll be rejected according to Isaiah 53. They find all of this evidence and they've embraced Yeshua as their own Messiah. They're called Messianic Jews. They're not Christian, they're Messianic Jews. Well, guess what? The Ultra-Orthodox also hate the Messianic Jews. And their hate doesn't end there. They even hate the Reformed Jews. So most of the Jews, as far as I know, in America are Reformed Jews. And they have actually issued a statement, the Ultra-Orthodox, that if you as a Jew go into a Reformed synagogue, it's as if you went into idolatry. And they say that if you go into a church is idolatry. So this is the state of the Ultra-Orthodox movement. We would certainly compare it to the Pharisees. What they don't seem to understand is that Judeo-Christianity created the modern Western world. The modern democratic or republic civilizations right now on earth were founded on Judeo-Christian value. What makes Western nations great is Judeo-Christian traditions and values. However, most Israeli migrants and citizens did not come from a democracy. They came either from the Muslim world or they came from the communist dictatorships. And that's how, the Sephardics are mainly from the Muslim world and the Ashkenazi are from the former communist or currently communist countries. Now, Avigdor Lieberman, who would not form government with Netanyahu, draws his greatest support from the Russian Jews. Remember, these are the people who came not from a conservative background, not from a democratic background, they came from a communist background. So Lieberman was supposed to be a friend of Netanyahu, but he turned on him because of the religious issue. The Ultra-Orthodox wanting exemptions and extra money, and they did not want that, so they couldn't form. Netanyahu himself is not Ultra-Orthodox, but he was planning to form his coalition government with a lot of the Ultra-Orthodox. The Ultra-Orthodox, of course, have the ulterior motive and the vision of taking over everything in the state. So this is why a snap election was called. The seventh fact I want to give Christians to understand Israel today. A snap election has been called on the 17th of September, and this right now means that there's no government form. This creates a lot of instability in Israel, and I think an opportunity for Satan to attack Israel. Remember, according to the enemies of the Jews, America is the great Satan, but Israel is the little Satan. So there is a threat of regional war looming with Iran. Iran probably will use its proxies like Hezbollah in Syria, and that's a constant threat to Israel. But another threat that people don't realize is there is actually the risk of a civil war in Israel. Just like you might not think it, but there is a risk of civil war, a great second American civil war in this country because people are just so divided. I think they're divided, first of all, spiritually. I don't think the answer is politics. I think the answer is in Christ. He is the peace who breaks down the dividing walls. Only Yeshua can bring that kind of peace. And I'm very concerned for America. I'm concerned about the prophetic words that have gone forth that America might actually have all-out civil war. This is not spiritual. This is like people slaughtering each other in the streets. And I'm writing right now, God's put in my heart, I'm writing a book to President Donald Trump that will be tentatively titled 10 Ways to Save America. I think that there is a biblical template that if we go back to it, if the leaders, the pastors, the people hearing this would go back to the biblical template, we can solve this problem and it can happen fast. It can happen fast. The Protestant Reformation happened fast. The Germanic states were in confusion. They were under oppression. The papal authority was over them. And as soon as Martin Luther and the Reformers got back to the Bible, wow, the change happened so fast. I have faith. I have faith in God, and I believe that this kind of unity can come back to the country very quickly. One of the divine codes, I'm the author of the divine code, so I like to talk about codes. It doesn't mean that I'm following the codes, but I let the codes speak. I see where is this going? What are the meanings of these patterns and numbers? What can they tell us? And I think the fact that the election is on the 17th of September is quite optimistic. It gives me some hope because 17 is the number of victory. And victory for who? Well, usually when you're in an election, victory means victory for the incumbent. Defeat would mean the incumbent is defeated. He loses. So the fact that it's on the day of victory is pretty good. And it's another parallel to Donald Trump, because the election of Donald Trump in 2020, I believe he's going to win, is also on the 17th, but on the Hebrew calendar. It's going to be the 17th of Hespan. So that's one of my favorite chapters in the Divine Code, and a prophetic encyclopedia of Numbers, is chapter 17. So check that out. You can go to Amazon and get those 2 volumes. So I believe that some optimism is due here. I believe that even though we're in a time of uncertainty, we're waiting for the next election on September 17. I believe that the 2 conservative parties that didn't meet the threshold could actually unite, work together, and then form that necessary threshold, get that necessary threshold. I also believe that even though the Bible Bloc Party has been relatively unknown, this is like a second opportunity. This re-election might actually, give them a chance to get the word out. And I'm not part of it or anything, but I just think that it's the only chance for Christians to have representation. How is it that there's 2% Christians in that country and 0 representation? I think the Bible Bloc Party clearly has the only platform where they want Jews and Christians to love each other and not hate each other. I think that's really important for the future of Israel and for the future of democracy in Israel. It's the Judeo-Christian foundation that made democracy possible in America and the Western world. And a lot of the Jewish migrants lack that. So you really do need Judeo-Christians or Jews and Christians to work together. I want to close by saying that there are some prophetic implications, and I know people are waiting for, the third temple, and you've heard me speak about these things, but I want to be clear that what we are seeing developing in Israel right now, and with this broader understanding, with this explanation of Israel, I think that we see a bigger and clearer picture of both delay, but also opportunity. I think clearly there's no peace plan that's going to be announced by Donald Trump. That deal of the century is on hold. Because if there's no government form, it's not really the opportune time. It might be a losing proposition for Donald Trump or Jared Kushner to announce any kind of a peace plan. But they may well go ahead, but I just think this is a delay. I think because of that, there's no third temple being announced. And I'd already said that in the prophetic codes in chapter 150, chapter 19, several chapters in my books, The Divine Code. I think there are codes and patterns that are saying we're looking into the 2020s for any kind of announcement or construction of the third temple. So you can get that on ebook or a physical paperback book as you wish. But the codes already tell me, but this surprise snap election confirms. So you hear a lot of prophecy teachers been talking about third temple, third temple, third temple. And we're excited, not in the sense that the Antichrist is going to come, but we're excited that prophecy is near. That means Jesus is near. However, I think there's a delay, and that means we got to seize the opportunity, seize the moment. You got to learn to flow with God as He changes times and seasons. I heard Kim Clement say this, and I just want to say it, in the same spirit, that you've got to learn, Christians, you've got to learn not to be stuck in your own doctrine or theology, but discern what is the right time, what is the right season. Some people might say, well, Pastor Steve, you used to talk about the blood moons and the solar eclipse. And yeah, I did, because that was the season. And that season will come again. If you don't know, there are solar eclipses coming that are right on Hanukkah. It's going to come 3 years in a row. I'll get back to talking about that when it's time. There will be another great American solar eclipse in 2024. I'll talk about that when it's time. But now, that's not the time. Now, God is saying in the Spirit, the time is for justice. The time is for the church to rise up and understand more than just grace and righteousness. We've got to get a hold of justice. And that's why I believe Mike Pence is in the he's the VP, and Donald Trump has been put there as the president, and they'll both get reelected if we understand God's agenda and time. Right now, it's not time for the peace deal. It's not time for the third temple. It's not time for the Antichrist. It is time for the great awakening. Let me close by quoting what the Lord Jesus Christ told us in Luke chapter 12, verse 54. Then he also said to the multitudes, whenever you see a cloud rising out of the west, immediately you say, oh, a shower is coming, because the west is the Mediterranean for them. And so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, you say, there will be hot weather. What's south of Israel? It's Africa. Hot weather, hot wind is blowing. And he says, there is. Hypocrites, Jesus said. You can discern the face of the sky and the earth. But how is it that you do not discern this time? I think that's a strong word to the leaders of the church in America. How is it that you don't discern the time? This is the time to stand up for truth. This is not the time to apologize for praying for the President of the United States. This is the time to stand up with him. This is not the time to win a popularity contest. This is the time to stand up for righteousness and justice. And as people realize there's justice, there's wisdom for justice in the church, I believe a great awakening will spark in America and in Israel. And then there will be hope that Israel will not turn so far away from God. There will be a chance for many Jews to discover that Yeshua is the Messiah. And isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we're praying for? So I pray that you've now understood a bit more about what's going on in Israel. If you want to come take a tour with me, please contact our ministry at discover.org.au and make sure that you know Jesus Christ in your heart. Make sure you know him before all of these things go down and the prophecies get fulfilled. The time is so near.